Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
Elias Miller was staring at the old man sitting in a lone chair in the corner of the restaurant and wondering to himself, does that guy even know he's dead? When the scritching of a chair's legs on the wood floor diverted his attention. That's Charlie's chair. No one sits there except him. The woman who sat herself across the table from Miller softly spoke. Unbidden, she continued to elaborate on the subject at hand. Every night after work, he would come in, and sitting in that chair, he would read the newspaper while sipping his coffee. He then goes home to his ailing wife. She had a cancer, you see. One night he put a bullet in her head to relieve her suffering, and then did likewise to himself. Some say he continues to come in every night and sit in that chair just like he always did, and that is why it is roped off. Turning her head to look directly at Miller, she introduces herself. Kelsey McNeil, sir. Would you be Elias Miller, the private detective? Gently taking the hand extended to him, that's me. He sullenly responded to the thin, pale woman with flaming red hair. I understand that you have a job for me. Well, that depends. On what? Madame Dupree says that you have special skills. Miller had heard of the occultist and psychic called Madame Dupree, in that she was a seer consulted by some of Boston's rich and famous. Kelsey, dressed in a full-length fur coat and with diamonds and other jewels on her hands and draped around her neck, fit the rich part. Famous, however, didn't click with her name. How did she define special skills? He asked. You saw Charlie sitting there, didn't you? What if I did? Dupree told me that you died in the war, but came back. That ever since then you've been able to see the dead and communicate with them, among other abilities that have helped you solve crimes others couldn't. Miller felt like a kid who had been caught cheating in school and was being given a lecture by the principal. It has been useful, he reluctantly admitted. Excellent, McNeil said without much enthusiasm. Reaching into a side pocket of the purse that hung on her arm, she retrieved a small piece of paper and handed it to the detective. A little over a year ago, my brother heard of the oil and gas finds in the Permian Basin of Texas and went there to see if he could get in on the business opportunities. We haven't heard from him since, and the law in Texas was not being helpful at all. So I went to Madame Dupree, and she came back with those 3 words. A place called Draco, Texas. And then what appears to be a name, Oberdan. Texas is a long way off. Before Elias Miller could finish his statement, a thick stack of $20 bills was pulled out of Kelsey's purse and placed on the table in front of him. No need for you to do anything but go straight through that town and not stop, said the wiry man with sun-leathered skin and a sheriff's badge on his vest. Especially no reason for you to be there after sundown. Folks in Draco don't much cotton to outsiders. Everything you'll need is at the work camp. Company store, company saloon, and company whores. And company sheriff, grumbled Miller as he finished gassing up the rickety war surplus Liberty truck. Sheriff William Carden gives a hard look at the man with the 5-day-old beard and ragged scar that started above his left eye and traced down to his right jaw. What's your name, fella? Miller, Elias Miller. Why? So, we'll know what to put on your grave marker. It's dangerous work out in them oil fields, even if all you're doing is driving that truck. I've been in dangerous situations before, said Miller, who then pointed to his face. Like when one of the Kaiser's men used his pig sticker to do this. Listen here, bud. You look like you might be someone for whom the rules don't mean much. And you don't know the way things are around here? That oil company boss man you want to work for won't care how tough you think you are, and he won't think twice about making you into coyote bait, so you better mind the rules. Miller didn't respond, just used his pocket knife to cut off another chunk of chewing tobacco and place it in his mouth. Even though Draco was established a half-century before in 1875 and had been a notorious outlaw hideout with several violent deaths, it seemed completely devoid of any ghostly activity. Also peculiar, all west-facing windows had iron bars on them, the exception being the small shack behind the general store where Miller was being allowed to stay while he fixed the truck. Looking up from the compass in his hand to the shed's west wall, his eyes were drawn to the window's frame. No nails, just wooden pegs holding it together. The same for the rest of the structure he was standing in. This created an uneasy feeling that sent his hand under his heavy work coat to check the shoulder holster that held his M1911. "Come on, Elias. Shake it off and think," he says under his breath. Despite the Sonora sheriff's warning, the people in the town seemed to be going out of their way to make him welcome, even to the point of inviting him to their Halloween activities when everyone would gather that night around the nearly 9-foot stone pillar in the square. Something about not seeing any children around, who would normally be engaging in the ancient celebration, made him politely decline. A chill October wind blew through the open window, and when it carried a cloud of the ochre-colored West Texas dust to his nostrils, it sent him into a choking spasm. As Miller stepped to close the opening, his vision went to the monolith in the near distance. There, in the flickering pale yellow light of the torches that the townspeople had placed around it, he saw Au Boudin chiseled into the base. It came to Miller, after some thought, that supernatural beings can be seriously harmed or even destroyed by iron and salt. He had suspicions that the store wouldn't have any of these items, especially on Halloween, and he had been right. So it was with a deep sense of hope, as he was on his way back to the truck, that his boot kicked up an old cast-iron horseshoe. Knowing that the creatures that inhabited Draco wouldn't just let him drive out of town, he at least had something to even the fight. As he finished lashing the shoe to a mesquite branch and thus fashioning a kind of battle axe, he heard the grocer's wife, Mrs. Green, at the shed's door. "It gets a bit cool at night, so I thought you might need some extra blankets, Mr. Miller," softly spoke the elderly lady. When he turned to face the woman, she saw the improvised weapon Miller was holding and said with a sneer, "My, aren't you the clever one?" "Who or what is Au Boudin?" Miller asked with a growling sound. Not needing a disguise any longer, Mrs. Green, the overly pleasant grocer's wife, fell away and revealed a cadaverous crone instead. With a high-pitched screech of a voice, she responded, "It doesn't seem to have been that long ago, but I guess it has. 1,500 years to be exact. I and the rest of my kin pledged a covenant to the King of the Damned. He is the arch-enemy of the king of the Christian invaders to our lands in what is now called Scotland. In return, Satan opened the blood iron gates, the metal of which was smelted from the blood of martyrs and saints, to the lands of the Dark Fae. Thereupon was unleashed the Slaw and their queen, Au Boudin, to feed on the souls of those who opposed them. We were on the verge of reconquering the lands from the Isles to the Highlands when 14 heroes, chosen from the last of the clans, came against us. When the battle ended, only Au Boudin and one of the heroes remained. As he lay dying of his grievous wounds, he gave instructions to take his blood and that of his 13 slain comrades and fashion a blood iron weapon to be used against the Slaw Queen. With a huge grin stretched across his face, Elias Miller spoke to the revelation that had just flowed into his mind. As long as she is alive, your coven will be also. You guys thought the better of it would be to run, and that's how you ended up here. So once a year, on the eve of Samhain, what we call Halloween, you feed the bitch." Raising the horseshoe weapon to be between himself and the witch, he spoke sharply, "And I'm intended to be that sacrifice. I knew you were smarter than you looked, but you are a very special soul, having been to the other side and back. You might say, a delicacy." You gotta know that I'm not going down without a fight. That is why I am here, lad, to take the fight out of you." With that, the blankets leapt out of Green's arms and wrapped themselves tightly around Miller. Soon after the witch left to join the others gathered around the obelisk, the clock struck midnight. That was when the slog finding the mark was followed by Oberdin being set slightly back. Confused and standing on unsteady legs, the hellish being was desperately trying to pull the bolt from her chest, but was suddenly too weak to do so. A thick, black cloud formed around her as the screams of the coven outside shook the room with earthquake intensity. When the cloud dissipated and all was again still, her desiccated body fell to the floor. Kelsey walked purposefully to the corpse and kicked it. The ancient dry flesh turned into a cloud of dust, and the brittle bones came apart in splinters. Reaching down, she recovered her arrow with the blood iron tip from among the remains. Being the bait in your trap, I would say that is what I would call too close for comfort, Miller admonished with feigned anger while disentangling himself from his bindings. You needn't worry, Mr. Miller. God has plans for you beyond what happened here, Kelsey quietly replied as she turned to the doorway and awaited the first rays of the rising sun. When Elias stepped to stand beside the woman, he noticed a faint white aura seemed to be emanating from her. What about his plans for you? With the ending of Oberdin, the oath I took a millennium and a half ago also ended. With the dawn, I will join those of my clan that went before, and my husband, the 14th warrior. Luck end. I was so feeble at that night. I couldn't help myself. I saw a lady from my window who was passing by in front of our house. I looked at her and went down. Her mouth-watering blood would return my vigor. I grabbed her tightly and bit her neck. She couldn't move. I heard her piteous cry. It didn't bother me somehow. I was enjoying sucking her delicious blood. She satisfied my needs. I stared her for a long time. She was totally bloodless. I dragged her body in our backyard. There was a hidden door where we put all the bodies of our guiltless victims. Our house was located in a quiet suburban neighborhood. However, people thought that our house was abandoned and no one lived here since it looked like an antique house. It was belonged to my great-grandfather, Raoul. My mother, Dawn, who looked like 20s, made my father to take his breath away. It was 11:45. I heard the moaning of my ailing brother. "Drake, Drake, Drake, your brother." I rushed to his room. He was pale as death. My mom said, "Drake, you need to find someone with tasty blood for a Than." As usual, I needed to look at my window for a while. There was a drunk man who vigorously walking due to intoxication. I immediately jumped out from my window. I bit his neck. He couldn't utter words. I brought him inside our dim house that had only one lit candle on the outmoded table. We let him suck his blood until he completely well pleased. My mom and dad disposed the body in our secret room. The foul smelling of the rotting bodies covered the gloomy room, but no one wondered about it. It was 12:30. It was the time to go outside. We needed to find humans' blood. We were so fortunate to see the clique of ladies who lost their way. We cordially talked to them with smirked on our faces. They seemed perplexed while looking on us. Instead of saying anything, they decided to follow us. When we reached our house, my younger brother, Athan, immediately locked the door, and each of us grabbed each lady and sucked their blood. They made us contented and quenched our thirst. Soon after, my mom put some unconsumed blood on our pitcher and put it on the refrigerator. My dad and brother brought the cold bodies of the pure ladies, while my brother was dragging one of the bodies. He called me, "Drake, Drake, come here." With excitement, I ran fast as I could. "Did you bring the knife?" I was so bewildered with what he said. "Stayed here for a while. I have to go inside." He went inside and got a knife. He sliced the hands from one of the ladies. He gave one to me. We both brought it in our room, since there was still blood on it. On the next day, I heard an anonymous voice of men and women who cackle outside the house. I abruptly woke up and stood on my bed. I peeped out at the window. They were making a proposal on one of their films. The Haunted? They were longing to glimpse what was inside of our house. It was shrouded of mystery. I talked to my mom and dad about what I saw. They had just grinned from ear to ear while staring at me. Our archaic clock that we inherited from our ancestors seemed to be part of our dark plan. It sounded horrible when it turned at 12 o'clock. Our door began to open. The first one who entered was a stout man who holded the camera, then a fastidious lady who wore a white skirt with a purse on her left hand. The other members followed them. Since they were staying in our abode, we needed to get silent as the dead for a meanwhile. They started to roam around the house with flashlights on their hands. The skinny lady took photos. They were mesmerized of the antiquity of some of the stuffs. My brother, who hid behind the begrimed cabinet, he couldn't help himself anymore. He pounced like a wild animal on the man who was wearing a blue cap. No one of them perceived the whimper of a frail man. "Let's divide our group." That was the word I heard from one of the men. The clique that was composed of 10 members, they seemed, couldn't skip. When I peeked on my fine white blanket with streak on it, I saw my dad sucking the blood of the most loquacious lady of their group. "Here, taste it." I didn't hesitate to seize her from my dad. I didn't let myself to hang back. I tasted delectable blood ever. "Thanks to you, lady," I muttered. We hid her body under my treasure bed. "I have to go," my dad mumbled. I was not really satisfied. I went under my bed to suck all her blood. I was fortunate with a smirk on my bloody face. One of them noticed that the 2 members were missing. My mom had no difficulty in captivating one of the men. She started to bit his neck and gulped his blood. My mom hid under the grubby timber ladder. She was enjoying its flavorsome drinks. For a while, the lady who wore a white skirt saw a blot on the floor. She followed it and opened the refrigerator. She saw some bottles of blood. She opened it and sniffed. She was pale as a ghost and screeched when someone held her shoulder with compacted pressure on it. She looked behind her. She saw a tall man with pointed fangs. I saw her blood-curdling face. That was my dad. He bit her neck and sucked her delectable blood. "Come here." I gulped her blood as fast as I could. It turned my gloomy night to an exhilaration one. We kept her body inside the refrigerator. The other members were enjoying looking at my grandfather's portrait like a living person. The man who was bald went downstairs to check some of his peers. The stain on its handle caught his interest. He opened it and his feet fixed on the ground, he couldn't move. He was so petrified. "Good that you like our place," in a mumbled tone. He couldn't help himself to freeze for a while.